All right. Thank you for joining this I'm Squared Marketing Masterminds live forum, the Frictionless funnel. We'll give folks about 2 more minutes to jump on, then we'll get started. While we're waiting for everyone to join, please take a moment to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. All right, so it's 11 o'clock Eastern. We'll get started sharply. So welcome. My name is Z Jarmick. I'm today's host and CEO of Mass Engines. We are a martech partner for mid to large B2B companies focused on building lead management and, more importantly, revenue engines. I'm really looking forward to moderating this conversation, which is going to focus on using automation to reduce friction in your funnel. This is really part 1 of our 3-part fall series, which will see us run 1 live conversation per month. So you've joined us for the automation one. We'll cover revenue operations and we'll cover attribution in the following 2 months. For those of you who've joined us before or who haven't joined us before, this series is meant to be a live interactive discussion. So we want you to engage over chat. And Mike, if you feel comfortable, I mean, really, as remote work continues kind of to be the norm, more or less, I think we're certainly opening up, but so much of our ability to connect, I think, is still largely virtual. So take the opportunity that we really have set these up to try to build a community, to have the conversations that are really just not happening anywhere. A lot of conversations are one way, even podcasts tend to be that way. What we really want to do is we have some experts here on both sales and marketing side. We're going to tackle some topics around reducing friction. We'd love to hear from you and get you engaged and answer your questions and get you engaged in the conversation. Cool. With that in mind, what does the next 45 minutes look like? So we'll start by answering a few questions that came prior to the forum, then we'll turn it over to you. So if you have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss, share it in the chat, and Aliyah, our chat box moderator, will work with me to bring them forward. And if you're comfortable, we'd love to have you come on mic to ask your questions. Now, on to our guest speakers. So as usual, we really are trying to make sure we create a balanced discussion for the full funnel, both marketing and sales. So in the marketing corner, we have Elizabeth George, Director of Demand Gen at Split.io. Elizabeth has a great perspective on marketing technology, as she has worked with both established and startup companies building brands and corporate strategies. In our other corner, and bringing the sales perspective, we have Steven Wright, the President and CEO of Focus. Steven has a vast experience building inside sales team at various organizations. Welcome, Elizabeth and Steven. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. So I know we're all looking forward to getting the conversation started. So one last thing, let's kind of go over a few housekeeping items. So, you've all been on many, I'm sure we've all been on many calls. So stay muted unless you want to contribute something. That will keep the background noise to a minimum. If you have a question or a comment, type it into the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, please direct message Emily Paola. She will help. She will do her best to help. And everything that we are going to discuss and share in this event today will be sent in a follow-up email to all the participants. So You don't have to be worried about frantically taking notes and screenshots. We'll share it all. All right, so great. I think we're in a good place. Let's get into it. Again, we're trying to cut out a lot of the fluff and really kind of focus most of the time here on the conversation itself. So really, this conversation is meant to focus on the frictionless funnel. How do we increase conversions through the funnel? And how do we better use our existing sales and marketing automation tools to enable a more seamless customer journey? To kick us off, we'd love to get you engaged. Let's hear from you. So in just a second, you'll see a question pop up. How would you describe your company's progress when it comes to automating your customer journey? So it's a really good way to feel out the audience and where people are. And I think it helps set the stage for the conversation. Okay, so we'll give everyone a minute, and we'll share the results here shortly. And then we'll continue the conversation. All right, there we go. So, okay, so I think that certainly not surprising. We're seeing the majority of us are just getting started. We also have a number of folks who feel they're well on their way. This is amazing. I think that certainly based on this, I think everyone's going to get some value from the conversation here. All right, so this is excellent. So let's dive in. It's good. That was a good way to start. And where I'd love to take it from here is I'd love to turn to Elizabeth for a question that I feel is oftentimes brought up and rarely really delved into. And Elizabeth, I'd love to for you to help us get us started and talk to us a little bit about the difference between lead gen and demand gen, and why does it matter, especially in terms of this conversation?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. So commonly lead gen is just collecting your leads in a variety of different channels and plopping them into your CRM and just dropping them off and letting people take it from there. Demand gen is really about sales readiness, ensuring intent is there, quality is there, and helping drive them through the entire funnel. So providing value add materials and really just driving them from discovery to close. And your whole part of demand gen is that it's a soft handover to sales. You really work together as a team for it.
Love it. Love it. Succinct and to the point. So I think that I think there's some fine points, and I really think you raised them well around the difference between lead gen and demand gen. I also think I'd love to kind of turn it over to Steven and get his take on the difference between CRM and sales automation.
Two commonly misinterpreted or combined terms from there, but I mean, to put it simply, guys, CRM is just a tool. I joke in 2003 when I started to dabble around CRM, the market was, what's this thing called CRM? We need a CRM. But ultimately, it is a tool to historically capture sales information, but today, marketing, post-sales support, et cetera, centralize that information, and again, capture it all in kind of one place from that standpoint. Sales automation is the usage of that data, leveraging that data to run analytics, forecasting, demand generation, et cetera, et cetera. It's using that information to build and leverage some value of AI in terms of kind of replacing some of the mundane and repetitive tasks. It's using that information to identify gaps, so we can look at backfilling and taking action on perhaps some skill development training or some strategy improvements from that standpoint. So CRM is just the tool. It's a centralization and the management of the data, whereas sales automation is actually the leveraging of that information to further and to better your underlying sales and marketing process.
I love that. That's so well said. And I think that these differences, I wanted to start here because I feel like these differences, so this difference between lead gen and demand gen, difference between CRM and sales automation, I feel like they really underpin, and both of you kind of, I feel like really kind of honed in on the key difference there. And I feel like that they really underpin the conversation today around how do we reduce the friction and increase the conversions through the funnel. And I feel like there were some hints in both of your guys' definition of both demand gen on the marketing side and sales automation. So I'd love to, again, we're just getting kind of warmed up here. So I'd love to kind of take us to I almost feel like the next logical question here, looking at like some of the typical friction points in the funnel. So if we're going to talk about reducing the friction, we got to identify what's causing the friction in the first place. So again, I'd love to kind of maybe we'll go back and forth. And for everyone joining us, share your thoughts, please. Again, this is really meant to be a live forum, an engaging experience where it's everyone's perspective can be heard, and we can actually also would love to get any questions, perspectives from you. Feel free to put it into the chat, and we'll work to bring it into the conversation. If you have any kind of what's in your mind, what's your reaction, we'd love to know. But okay, so I'd love to let me go back to Elizabeth here. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on some of the typical friction points in the funnel.
Muted. Yeah, I think one of the key things is the handoff process when it comes to the friction areas. The value or quality of a lead is usually causing disruption between marketing and sales. And that handoff process can really cause issues. So a lot of finger pointing at each other to say, well, I couldn't close it because it wasn't good. And well, I gave you a lot, so what's wrong? So there's not a lot that you can work on through that friction, unless you start to realize that a handoff process is not finite and also that the customer journey is not linear. So they can come back, they can jump into sales, they might not be sales ready. You mark them as such, as I'm sure Steven mentioned in the automation component. They can come back into the sales nurture campaigns, marketing nurture campaigns. They can jump around a lot. You have to think like the customer. So one of the key friction points is that handoff process, but as long as you know, like you can hand something over and it can be handed right back to you and you open up that communication channel, you can really help to reduce that friction.
I love it. I love it. It's interesting for anyone that really wants to dive into that particular the friction, the handoff. I feel like we did a deep dive in our last forum around the idea of utilizing lead scoring as not as a tool, for example, but as a methodology to actually engage marketing and sales in a productive conversation about how to reduce friction in that specific part. And I love it, Elizabeth. I do think that is one of the, if we want to talk about low-hanging fruit, the handoff, that MQL, or there's a number of other terms that have been flying around, but the handoff between marketing and sales, I think it's the lowest hanging fruit, and it's actually, funny enough, the easiest one to dive in and address fairly quickly. I'd love to get Steven's point of view, but before I do that, I think one of the things, and I know a lot of, we have a lot of marketers that usually join. I'd love, I know from most of them, they're either directly or indirectly are feeling that pain of the handoff. But I'd love to get your points, Elizabeth, around the idea when it comes to friction. It's almost like the invisible friction on the marketing side, where someone is trying to, you have a buyer in, researching, trying to learn, trying to educate themselves, and where they're just not getting what they need and they move on. They either move on from trying to find a solution, or they move on from your brand and anything that you can share with them. I'd love to, again, I call this an invisible because I think it's still many ways we can't see it and we don't understand it. We know it's happening. I'd love to get your thoughts. How much do you think, or in your experience, is that a challenge, and how have you seen automation, like marketing automation, being used, or other demand generation being used to try to address some of that friction?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is like turnaround time. So the ability to respond to people's requests when they convert on whatever materials or anything on your website or request outreach, you have to work on their time schedule, not your own really. And it's really important to use automation and triggers to ensure that they feel heard, responded to, and we're working on their schedule. And so one of the key things that we do anyway is we ensure that we provide easy access to calendars, immediate response times, and true, genuine communication. Just because it might be automated doesn't mean it has to be fancy, glamorous imagery. It really could just be an email directly from an SDR, but triggered through automation. But then also if they're in the research stages of what they do, being pretty upfront about knowing that. So you've downloaded a piece of content, or you've attended a webinar, or you've requested a demo, you can only assume that they've done the same with other brands. So just making sure that you're upfront about that. Oh, you're in your research process. These are some other value add things that might help you. And being the thought leader in that research process would be important, I believe.
I love it. So really kind of what I'm hearing you say is, again, lead with content. Don't be shy around suggesting similar content, following. You mentioned triggers, using, if someone visits your site, you generally, your systems know that. You can automatically trigger a follow-up email. And again, you can be obvious or non-obvious about why they're getting that email, but you can certainly suggest similar content and try to essentially to arm them with the information that they're looking for and make sure that you become that source. I love it. I love that. Makes perfect sense. And that's exactly been, I feel like, my experience and where I've seen companies really succeed in reducing friction on the marketing side. Steven, I'd love to get your point on the sales side. I mean, I think a lot of folks look at sales as like, they're sitting at the phone, they're pounding the phones, they're calling, they're engaging, but there's still, I think there's certainly a number of friction points even on the sales side. I mean, any good salespeople person knows you got to be able to overcome like the objections, right? How do you deal with like someone that's ghosting, right? And et cetera, et cetera. I'd love to get high level some of your thoughts around how do you reduce friction, both with people and or automation.
Yeah, I'll come back and touch on a little bit of the working friction between the various departments, sales and marketing. But within the sales department in and itself, one of the most common friction points that I see is just the alignment of resources. And what I mean by that is, to use cliche terms, hunter and farmer from that perspective. There's a general confusion that I see, and I believe that a single salesperson can do both successfully. When in all reality, there's a different skill set at play between, potentially generating net new business and looking for net new business. And there's a general different skill set than, continuing to kind of farm and nurture an existing book of business. And so this first friction point, which is basically getting your single salesperson or sales team to find time to do both, is a friction point. And again, that's really due to lack of skill in either one of the areas. It could be ultimately a capacity issue. I'm managing a book of 150 accounts. How am I going to find time to look for a new business? But to be honest, it's probably a desire. Most people like to do one or the other. And so the first friction point that I see, again, just to reiterate, is not properly aligning your resources, your skill sets around those two areas of the sales cycle. I hope that makes sense from that perspective there. So I'm a big fan of divide and conquer. Define your business development, define your account management and nurturing process, and hire and develop and build your sources or your resources around those two buckets. Okay. But coming back to the sales and marketing side of it, and I joke because especially with us moving a lot more virtual, it's actually further siloed. Still to this day, marketing operates as marketing, sales operates as sales, and to even expand it, even post-sale, customer success now operates as customer success. There is no unifying process, that kind of aligns them all. And just this constant handover from marketing to sales to customer success. Each of those departments are running different objectives, different KPIs, different systems, perhaps different technologies, for example. And so the constant handover, at the end of the day, the customer is the one that's being tossed around, building different trust points throughout that. And so again, that's where I ultimately see a lot of friction happening, just a simple handover process. But again, within the sales department, just to tackle back, is just the alignment of resourcing.
Gotcha. No, thanks for that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that there is, I think it's specifically, would you say it's fair to say the kind of the mix up between farmer and hunter is more prevalent in smaller companies, or have you seen that happen in some of the larger companies as well?
I mean, usually with smaller companies, they might be limited on their need to build a sales team. And so they will try to see hire a single person or a team of individuals that do both. In those situations where they may not be able to afford or need someone full time, leveraging, more fractional services, more of an outside, lead generation role, for example, might be handled. But no, in larger companies, yes, they might, split down a sales department into a sales development team, a business development team, an account management team, which is better. But, I'm seeing it across the board. I still see large multi-million-dollar companies having an account manager managing a book of business, still trying to find time and capacity to go out there and generate net new business, follow up with trade show leads and basic things like that.
Okay, no, that's very fair. So to summarize what I'm hearing you say, like when we talk about reducing the friction in the sales side of the funnel, it's role clarity, making sure that the roles are defined. And then I feel like still there's this element of that utilizing like the handover, again, from marketing to sales. I feel like you touched on that as well. I'm going to go back to the idea around utilizing automation to cue the next action, to actually leverage your CRM data more intelligently rather than having it just sit there and be used for reporting.
Correct. And
Awesome.
Z, just on that note, I mean, the days used to be where sales used one tool and marketing used another tool, and anything post support was using a completely different tool. I mean, today these tools either function in through one platform, or at minimum their ability to integrate. And so there's no reason why these silos can operate in one system. And so that's the first step, is choosing the technology and building the underlying process for that technology, basically building it as unity between the various departments there.
Awesome. So I'm starting to see some comments come through the chat. So this is awesome. Again, we'd love to have everyone engaged and kind of share your thoughts and your experiences. Again, feel free to type additional ones. We'll get to here in a minute. We'll get to some of the comments that have been starting to come in. But before we get to those, I'd love to do another quick poll to really kind of again gauge where everyone's at. So when it comes to friction points, where do you see friction points in your own funnel stages? Would you say, is it more around, there's just not enough nurture on the marketing side, that maybe the timing of follow-up is too slow, which I feel like Elizabeth kind of touched on that a little bit, the importance of that prompt follow-up, or is it more like sales doesn't follow up? And if it's something fourth, I would definitely say feel free to type it in the chat, and we'll include it as part of the consideration.
Could it be all of the above, perhaps?
That should have been maybe the fourth one. I think in the absence of it, though, I certainly hope people are going to select the one that's kind of the biggest pain. Okay, well, we got our results. Let's see here. So I almost feel like the not enough nurture still seems to be kind of top of mind. And I definitely will say again that from what I've seen, a lot of that goes down to either there's not enough content to power the nurture. So many times we've worked with companies where they're excited, they want to do nurture, and then you start actually peeling the onion back and like, oh, we got some spec sheets and data sheets, and there's maybe one ebook and there's just not enough content. So I know that can be a problem sometimes. The other problem sometimes is around how do you really think it through and design it. Timing of follow-up is too slow. I think there's a number of folks who've indicated that as well. Again, it goes back to that handoff between marketing and sales. Sales doesn't follow up. Again, I do feel like that definitely, especially on the marketing side, is always a bit of a pain point. I'd love to maybe take a moment here, and Steven, I'd love to go to you and get kind of the sales perspective on that. perception that sales doesn't follow up. What I've seen happen, and I've talked to so many sales organizations, and they're blunt. This is one of the things I love about sales. They're blunt. They're basically going to say, listen, time is money, and I get paid essentially on what I close. And the reality is that when marketing sends me 1,000 leads for people who stop by the booth to grab a tchotchke, I'm wasting my time calling those folks. And so, yes, I'm not following up, and they're very blunt about it. So, but I'd love to get your thoughts, Steven, around what are some of the other kind of objections from the sales side around, maybe not following up with some of these leads.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious is capacity and time. But I'll be first to admit that if I was a sales rep and I was being fed qualified leads, I'd be all over them. And that's the key, is what is a qualified lead? Just because someone came to our website and clicked on a couple of links, is that ready for me to follow up on? Did someone fill out a form and download a white paper? Is that something for me to follow up on? And so where I find a lot of the challenges is marketing is definitely feeding, let's call them leads, but sales may not be actioning them because they're looking at these leads and going, they're just not worth my time at this stage. And so that's where a misalignment as to, from a sales perspective, what is sales looking for? What is the definition of a qualified lead? What is the definition of an opportunity? And as a result, filtering that backwards to marketing, to being aligned as to, what should be properly fed to sales that will get action right away. Now, that's not an excuse, but I just generally see that there's a misalignment between what marketing feels that sales wants and what sales actually really wants is key. And let's be honest, sales may not know what they want. And so there's an active discussion between the two departments there as defining not only the basics, what is the definition of a lead, what's the definition of a qualified lead, but more importantly, what's the definition of an unqualified opportunity? And using that would drastically change how sales ultimately responds to whatever marketing is feeding them. So that's what I love it.
So I'm hearing you talk a lot about definitions, and I see this time and time again. There's even like a part of the sales organization might have definitions around their part of the funnel, but when you look at the whole organization, especially when you start talking in different departments, again, you ask marketing, what is a lead? And you ask sales, what is a lead? And you often get wildly different answers. So I'm feeling you really kind of zone into this idea that joint definitions are so important to make sure that we're talking about the same things. And I feel like that's also the first step towards moving towards automation, is making sure we're all on the same page around what the stages are.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that if we're going to make a cookie together, we should all be aware as to what the recipe is and align as to what that process is.
Love it, love it, love that. All right, awesome. So again, I'd love to kind of get into some live Q&A. I think there's a few questions coming that have kind of come in, some on the, or comments, some on the general board, some in direct messages. I believe Kenny may have shared a question. Kenny, would you like to come on the mic and ask the question?
Yes. Hi, Z. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Question for Steven, which is, if you have a PLG-based motion where there's pockets of penetration into an account and the sales motion is to drive expansion, meaning that, hey, like get a couple of users using the product and then try to go for team licenses or department level licenses, do you consider that new business or like a hunter motion or more of a farming motion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's a little bit of a gray line depending on, what the product is, what the type of client is, who you're dealing with, are you dealing with a completely different department to maintain the relationship versus a completely different department at the client site to generate net new business. So there's a little bit of a gray line there. Again, I'm a big fan of a divide and conquer. And so if a team is responsible for maintaining and executing what's already been purchased, for example, and an organization, can justify the expense, I'd love to have a team centralize and focus on building and executing the KPIs pertaining to that. But if a separate function is to grow the business and to expand, not necessarily just to get renewals, but perhaps to expand and get new add-ons and whatever the case might be, I like the idea of leveraging more like, let's call it a customer success department to really kind of grow that account. The key though is if it is going to be a divide and conquer, and if it is going to be two separate departments, unity, alignment is still critical there. It can't just be two separate silos again, to kind of work on that. Not too sure if that answers your question, Kenny. I do see it as a farmer role, a hunter role from an expansion standpoint. And ideally love to kind of divide and conquer, and treat them as two separate entities.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. That helps.
No, this is
And-
great, Stephen. Good question, Kenny. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. We've worked within our automation systems for product-led growth. We've worked on product qualified leads. So we basically want people in the lead area to be exposed to the product. And as they start to do things within the product, it triggers automation to tell them, what is readily available next steps as they're kind of absorbing the product. And that trigger goes to not only emails to the customer, but then also to the sales rep, the CSR, and any supporting people that can help them see the value. So we actually right now are tracking product qualification, and we're hoping to get it prior to opportunity stage so that we can get them really sales ready before they hit the door and open an opportunity. So there's also room for that triggering and automation there as well within the product.
Cool. That's a great process. Thank you.
Fantastic. I also noticed, I believe there's a comment from Manny. Manny, would you like to come on the mic and share?
Yeah, absolutely. I am an account executive at Metadata and started on the new business side, but we just implemented a process where we're becoming a lot more aligned with current customers. That goes back to the earlier discussion, but it's been really interesting to, the discussions are very, very different, and deciphering between or differentiating between a marketing qualified lead as a new business hunter versus identifying an upsell opportunity is something that thankfully I had experience doing in my last couple roles, but a lot of others did not. And it's just a completely different motion from a sales side. So it's been really interesting seeing that.
Love it. Love it. No, thanks for sharing. I mean, I think that this is, I'm going to go back to Stephen's point around defining the terms, and then everything else goes from there. And what certainly I've seen is that when there is really good alignment, I believe, again, Stephen talked about this, the idea of really, or maybe Elizabeth did, around really qualifying the lead. And that's a vast difference between a lead, again, something that just comes in, right? Hey, they submitted a form. Now all of a sudden they're a lead, and that, let's call that a regular lead, and let's call like a real qualified lead, irregardless of whether we're going to call a MQL or another term. Someone who's actually like the right, they fit the profile of a buyer. There's been a set of activities that seem to indicate that they're in a buying cycle, and using all of that to actually create, not just create a lead, but also highlight to sales that this is that qualified lead that should be called before anybody else. I do think that what I've seen time and time again, when that happens, it's shocking the kind of results you can generate. You can actually drastically reduce the number of leads, and what ends up happening is that sales all of a sudden has more time to follow up, and they're having better conversations, and you're starting like to basically build on that success, where they're actually going to be looking forward to the next lead that comes in, that qualified lead, rather than being like, oh, I'm not even gonna, it's another one, right? Or it's another 20, right? I know where this is gonna go. So, thanks for sharing, Manny. I think that's definitely kind of goes right into the conversation. Awesome.
I think though, any marketer on the call right now, there's a big trend right now of front loading qualifications within the lead process, I'd say. And it can feel overwhelming when a lot of what marketing does for demand gen purposes is to, it's not targeted. You can target it as much as you'd like to, your different channels and avenues, but it's really like throwing a net and seeing what you can collect and working within that collection. But there are, and sales probably likes that the least amount, because they're like, how do we target this further? How do we get closer to that target? And so there's a lot of exploration around like ABM, account-based marketing. You take their, the salespeople's top target accounts that they really want to get into, and you build assets and pages built specifically for those accounts. And you speak to those accounts as specifically as possible. But this is like, that's something you do in parallel with your, net kind of approach. But it can help sales feel heard when you don't just say, look, we're doing what we can, we get what we get, and we'll deal with them. It helps to say, well, who are your target accounts? And maybe we can work on a campaign together. And maybe we can do this in parallel to what we're getting through the door. So if any other marketer on the call here is like I need more targeted stuff, or I need more quality, you never want to give up your volume, but you can definitely do some one-on-one projects with salespeople in their territories to find those proper leads that can really drive home an account, especially for land and expand.
Love it. Love it. I see Manny has a follow-up. Manny, if you're comfortable, come on mic and share it.
Yeah, I think that sales takes a lot of credit where they sometimes shouldn't. And a lot of that is attribution related, but I think it's kind of easy to get lost because you see someone marking a close won opportunity and it's an inbound lead that marketing has been nurturing, whether directly or indirectly for months, but they're just not exactly getting the credit. So I think having that recognition from the sales team and from leadership is key in keeping your marketers happy, because there's so much turnover in marketing orgs where there shouldn't be.
Love it. No, this is a fantastic comment. I love your follow-up. This is coming from a salesperson, so it's really, again, I feel like this is really kind of helping provide both perspectives. So one of the things I'd love to kind of get into is this idea. I feel like we've been touching on it. There's been some good points brought up, but I'd love to kind of get into this idea of how do we actually use automation to reduce friction. I feel like we've touched on it. I'd love to kind of get into a little more detail. I feel like we've kind of by default been going to marketing. Maybe this time we'll go to sales, go to Steven. Steven, I'd love to, maybe if you can give us some tangible examples of how you've used or how some of the organizations that you've worked with have actually used sales automation to reduce the friction in the funnel.
Yeah, I think let's assume that there is proper unity between the various departments, let's say sales and marketing. Let's assume that there is information sharing. Let's assume these departments are meeting as a team together. So let's assume there's alignment from a definition standpoint, from a communication standpoint. And now the question is, how do we leverage information? How do we leverage the automation piece in that? And so, someone came to me literally a couple of weeks ago and said, at the end of the day, what should my pipeline look like? I know what I need to hit, but what does my pipeline need to look like? And historically, you just said, well, okay, we're going to start at lead and we're going to work our way through to purchase. But it doesn't start at lead; it starts at awareness. And so, really, what we want to now start to be able to do is to gather the information from a conversion percentage by stage and from a duration by stage. And so, what I mean by that is, how if you have your various stages from a demand and lead generation standpoint, if you have your stages from an opportunity standpoint, a proper CRM is going to be able to spit out to you what the conversion rate is from each of those, from each record kind of going through those stages. And what you're also going to be able to find is an understanding through those stages, how often or how long does a record stay at any given of those stages. And so if you ultimately have stage duration and you have conversion rates, and then you can populate an overall probability of close. And on top of that, if you can start to gather information on average deal size or average project size or whatever the case might be, your ability to compute that into a formula that says, great, in order to hit 10 million, 50 million, 1 million, whatever the number is within a 12-month period, based on having these variables, I now know what my run rate needs to be, what my velocity needs to be at any given pace. So at a bare minimum, from an automation standpoint, getting to the point of being able to answer that question, what should my pipeline look like? Leverage automation to give you that information. Tools are so cool today with AI. The ability to kind of go in and replace mundane and repetitive tasks and things like that is another area to kind of go into. But like I said, if you're looking for one quick thing to do right away from an automation standpoint, leverage the analytics and let that develop your KPIs and metrics and hold your team accountable.
Love it. Love it. Great perspective. I see a question before we move on to Elizabeth and a little bit of a perspective. There's a question, Kenny, fantastic question. Would you like to come on mic, or I can ask for you? Okay, I see you. Okay, please go ahead.
I can ask, so just what do you think, Steven, a reasonable pipeline coverage ratio should be? So like at the start of it, I mean, you know this. So.
It's so hard to answer that. I wish I'd be able to say, oh, it's 10 times, it's 5 times, it's 3 times. It's because there's so many nuances and variables that kind of go into it. And so, you know, oftentimes I'll work with a new client. I'll be like, great, what's your run rate between qualified to quote, for example? And they'll go, I have no idea. And so, you know, we'll you know, the reality is, I would say, if you're quoting or you're providing a proposal, and you're not running at 50% or greater in terms of converting that to close, something's wrong, you know. And so you're either not qualifying early enough, you're not getting the necessary information. And so, you know, at minimum there, but like I said, I prefer to kind of go and run the analytics or take some best guesses and break it down into incremental components, rather than just saying you know, what should my run rate, or sorry, what should my, you know, quote to close kind of, you know, be. But I would say, just as a starting point, I don't know if this answers your question, Kenny, but you know, if you should be doing 50% or more for every 2 quotes you put out, you should be closing.
Right. I think the challenge for sometimes what I hear is that, you know, when you ask sales, they want I need like as much pipeline coverage as possible for me to hit my number. But then the, you know, the impact is that you've got to spend a lot more money at the top of the funnel to convert all of that. And then it becomes this very weird game of like conversion efficiency and who should actually own more of that. It kind of speaks to Elizabeth's point in the beginning about like marketing having to do a lot more to try to qualify, and how do you balance?
Well, and that's why I think if you think about it from those 3 components, stage duration, conversion rate, and average deal size, the small increment of change in each of one of those components will have a drastic amount. So for example, if your average deal size is, let's say, $1,500, changing that to $1,600 has a drastic impact on how much fuel you need to enter into the hopper at the beginning. Or if you simply just, you know, I'm gonna shave off 3 days of my stage duration from unqualified to quote, has a massive change in terms of how much you need to feed the hopper. So, you know, constantly looking at those 3, you know, default variables: stage duration, conversion, and average deal size, and asking yourselves, what can we do to continue to increase or fix this by 1%, will have a massive impact on how much you need to kind of feed the hopper.
Got it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good conversation. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think when we're looking at lead management, that's exactly, Steven, you nailed it. That's always what we're looking at. Define the stages, making sure there's alignment on them, and then make sure that you have visibility into the conversion ratios between stages, because that becomes your foundation from which you try to actually look to optimize and grow. So Elizabeth, I'd love to get some of your thoughts. Again, I feel like you've already touched on a few, but I'd love to kind of maybe get a little more insight from you around, you know, leveraging automation to reduce friction on the marketing side of the funnel.
Yeah, I mean, just to play off of the whole conversion metrics, I think I totally agree with Steven on that one. When it comes to lead gen, it's not always stable. Like, you can throw a big event and have 1,000 leads get dumped into your system. And so with that instability, the best method of tracking success are those conversion metrics. Doesn't matter how many leads you have, it just matters that they're converting at the same, if not higher, throughout the stages that they go through. And that's just something people can look to. I mean, I've worked for many companies where CEO or something would say, oh, our leads look down, or whatever the case may be, week over week. And it's such a micro analysis of what's really going on. So the best approach is, you know, this is why leads may be down, but also our conversion rates are doing better than ever or so, right? So you can really show success in that little area of conversion. When it comes back to automation, I mean, really, a lot of what I do anyway is we create our automation campaigns together. So with SDRs, with AEs, and we also help define our reason codes. I think this is something that everyone should really look to, is what are the reasons they either didn't continue, did continue, or otherwise, and how can we trigger that into a nurture campaign that can support them? So if a company that comes in too small for a sales opportunity, we it can be triggered to say, you know, company size or whatever the case may be. And then it'll pop into a free edition trial. So they can actually go into our product in a free edition without having to be a sales opportunity. And maybe they'll grow to a point that they're going to be product qualified in the future. But those reason codes are things that we align across on throughout the entire funnel. Even if they get to like a later stage opportunity stage, they could drop off for reasons we might not know. And how do we cater to them at that stage too? So demand gen doesn't stop at like nurturing to the leads. It continues on into any reason codes that we outline as a team, sales, marketing together, and making sure we treat people specially based on what their reasons may be.
I love that. I love that. I feel like that's such an important point around, again, it goes back to the idea that you can't manage what you can't measure. So even just being able to see what are the rejection reasons, why they're not moving forward becomes critical insight around what we need to improve. So love it. Love it.
Yeah, not just for, oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, but I think I'll echo what Elizabeth said there. It's not necessarily the reason for loss. It's actually the reason for win. You know, case in point, I had a team of sales reps that said, Steve, our win rate would be so much better if we just reduce our price. And so we ran a report of why we're winning our deals. And do you know what the answer was? Because of price. So it's like, you know, it's, you know, not only, and I think that's the key there, Elizabeth, is it's decision reason, not loss reason. And most people are defaulting to just track, you know, loss reason there.
Yeah.
Great point. Awesome. So, I mean, I think that, you know, it's so funny. I feel like we're just getting started and yet we're already at the 45-minute mark. So again, trying to be really respectful of everyone's time. You know, I know most of us are running, you know, remotely back-to-back meetings. So really, we're always trying to finish a little bit early. So I'd love to kind of take this question and move the conversation around how we can actually reduce the friction and specifically use automation. And I'd love to maybe take a few minutes and just share the takeaway that we've developed working together for this session around if we look at the funnel, what are some of those areas that you can and maybe should take a look at if you want to reduce the friction. So certainly we kind of thought through around some business process considerations, right? Like where do you kind of get started here? And I feel you'll see some of the points that we've actually ended up discussing here around definition of stages, specifically, as well as an anticipation of responses. Then we get into what are some of the elements in marketing automation that you can leverage. So again, mapping the content to your funnel and then being able to identify how folks are engaging. And then again, the idea of triggers, and I feel like Elizabeth talked about this, using triggers to respond automatically live to what your customers are doing or prospects. And then looking at the sales automation, there's some ideas there around, again, I really love the points Steven brought up around reporting, around definitions, role clarification. We've also, from an automation point of view, we've also tried to kind of outline idea of using workflow rules to set reminders, follow-ups around some of those agreed upon movements, and then as well as escalation and rerouting rules. So again, if someone's not following up or if it's stuck, how do we escalate? How do we get it unjammed? And we've seen this so often where, again, that conversation, there's a stall in the conversation. Maybe the prospect is busy or unresponsive, and it very, very easily can kind of drop to the bottom of the to-do list. And until they're disqualified, it's worthwhile to reach out. So either whether we're having a sales rep reach out or some automated motion around emails to them, or even some additional ads that are triggered to actually keep your brand top of mind, it can be very useful. So again, one of the things we're always trying to do is to make sure that to create a takeaway. So it's a conversation, but there's also a few thoughts that you can take with you afterwards. So with that said, thank you all for joining us. I feel like we could just keep going for another hour here, but again, time is Time is always always a challenge. If you did enjoy this month's discussion, join us next month. We're going to be diving into RevOps, revenue operations, as a concept. And I have a feeling we're going to be touching on a number of the topics that we've touched on in this session as well, in a lot more detail. I want to really thank our speakers, Elizabeth George and Steven Wright. Thank you so much for your time and your perspectives. And I want to thank the audience. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy days to join us and share a little bit of your thoughts and listen, I think, to some of our perspectives.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. As you're exiting, we'd love it if you can take a quick poll. Let us know what you loved and what you didn't love. We're always looking to improve. If there's areas that you found value, let us know. If you didn't find value, let us know. We'll certainly look to double up on the things that are valuable and reduce areas that are not. So, and again, join us next month, October 19th, for Demystifying RevOps. Thank you all for your time.